I just faced my own worst nightmare. The HOA president rolled up with 2 suits and a forged survey that sliced my driveway in half. Her reason? She said it was already allocated to community access. But the only thing that got tested that day wasn't my property lines. It was my patience. Patience not to knock them flat right there in the mud. It didn't begin with shouting. It began with silence. The trucks showed up just after lunch, rolling slow, like predators who already believed the land was theirs. 2 of them, shiny and black, the kind of machines that cost more than my cabin's worth. They parked at the edge of the county road, right where my gravel drive begins its climb into the ridge. I stood on the porch, boots pressed into damp pine needles, the smell of last night's rain still rising from the soil. The ridge had always been a place of peace. My grandfather built this cabin with his own 2 hands for that exact reason. Quiet, solitude. Up here, the world was supposed to stay still. But those trucks, they didn't belong. 4 doors opened. 4 figures stepped out. 2 in tailored suits, their shoes made for glass floors and boardrooms, not for the mud of Michigan woods. The other 2, heavier men, wore black tactical pants, their necks thick, their eyes restless, scanning. Security, or something meaner. I didn't wave, didn't move, just leaned against the same post my grandfather set 60 years ago and let them look at me. One of the suits pointed toward the cabin, speaking low, tablet in hand, while the others followed his gaze. They weren't just visiting. They were casing, measuring, already dividing up something that wasn't theirs to take. I had been building to this for months. First came the letters from the brand new Sable Ridge Estates HOA, signed by Karen HOA, a name that tasted of sugar but cut like vinegar. At first it was petty nonsense. My grass a 1/4 inch too long. My trim an unapproved shade of forest green. My woodpile unsightly. Every envelope, every threat disguised as courtesy. I crumpled and fed to the stove, but the letters were just smoke. The fire came when the survey crew arrived. 2 weeks ago. I hadn't called them. Yet they walked my ridge, planting bright pink flags 50 feet inside my land. A neon wound cutting my driveway and my property in half. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't about grass. It wasn't about aesthetics. It was a theft in progress, dressed up in paperwork. I pulled my phone from my pocket, thumb hitting a speed dial. My sister's voice answered after the first ring. "Hey, Cole," Paige said. Her tone was a lifeline, the calm sound of someone who knew the game better than most. She worked at the county recorder's office, my eyes in the system. More friends of Karen, I muttered. 2 suits, 2 goons, admiring my unsightly woodpile. Her keyboard clicked in the background. "Like clockwork," she said. "Filed this morning. A revised survey map under a company called Sable Ridge Minerals, LLC. Guess where it lines up?" I looked at the pink flag stabbing the ground like insults. My jaw tightened. "Let me guess." She didn't need to. "Exactly where you said. Front half of your parcel, driveway included. She's carving you out piece by piece." I breathed the name out slow. Sable Ridge Minerals. It meant nothing. A ghost. Registered last month to a P.O. box in Lansing, Paige confirmed. But guess whose name shows up on the HOA filings tied to it? I didn't even flinch. Karen HOA. Bingo. She's using the HOA as a crowbar, claiming your drive's now a common easement for their development. The men below shifted, retreating toward their trucks. They weren't here to talk. Not yet. Just to look. To remind me. I watched their doors slam shut, watched black paint vanish behind the tree line. "They'll be back," I told Paige. "They always come back." Earlier that week, Karen herself had rattled my gate in a floral blouse, Realtor in tow, demanding I unlock it so her partner could tour my cabin as if it were already for sale. I hadn't answered, just tightened the chain and left her staring. That same day, I cut a steel sheet, stenciled big black letters, and bolted my answer to, "The iron private property might not for sale." Then I photographed it, time-stamped, proof for whatever storm was coming. When the black trucks disappeared, I walked the drive alone. Each crunch of gravel under my boots was a vow. My grandfather had walked this same path, set the old survey, pins himself, marked the granite boulder shaped like a sleeping bear and the split oak tree that became our cornerstones. This wasn't just land, it was legacy. I left the pink flag standing, like bait. And from my pack, I pulled a spool of tripwire, thin as a spider's thread. I stretched it across the first flag to a noise alarm buried in brush. Nothing more than a doorbell, quiet enough for me but loud enough to tell me if anyone trespassed. My phone buzzed again. Paige's text. Trucks belong to Sable Ridge Minerals. Guards are ex-cops with bad records. Investors from out of state. They're playing for keeps, Cole, I typed back. So am I. Dusk fell heavy, the forest growing quiet around me. Birds hushed, pines whispered, the kind of silence that wasn't peace at all. It was the silence before thunder. They thought I was just some stubborn man in a wooden cabin. They thought intimidation and paperwork would break me. They didn't know me. They didn't know Tess. And they sure as hell didn't know what we were building in the basement right now. Because they weren't just after land. They had crossed a line they couldn't see. They had made it personal. Everyone thought I lived in a cabin. But the truth was, Tess and I had built a fortress, not out of paranoia, out of necessity. When people decide they want what's yours, paper and signatures can be as dangerous as any weapon. The moment the black trucks vanished down the ridge, Tess moved. My wife has never been the type to panic. She organizes. Where I dig in with my fists, she builds with her mind. By the time I stomped back in from stringing wire in the trees, the basement was alive with the low hum of machines. Grandpa's old workshop had been reborn into something else entirely. A command center. Concrete floors, shelves that once held hammers and saw blades now stacked with hard drives and cables. The smell of sawdust and motor oil still lingered, but mixed with it now was the faint electric buzz of screens flickering to life. 3 monitors, a laptop. A web of wires feeding into a server Tess had built herself from scraps and steel. On one screen, the ridge unfolded through 4 camera eyes, the locked gate, the porch, the long gravel drive, and the wide-angle yard. Camera 1 centered on the sign I'd bolted to the gate, private property, not for sale. Big block letters, date-stamped proof that I hadn't been silent in this war. All feeds hot, Tess reported, hair tied back, sweatshirt sleeves rolled high. Her fingers flew over the keyboard like a pianist playing something dangerous and beautiful. Everything hardwired, local storage, no cloud dependence. Power sits on a UPS, 30 minutes dark if the grid fails. Drones fully charged, spotlight rig tested. I followed her gaze to the corner, where the drone sat waiting on its pad. Not a toy. Not some flimsy gadget you'd buy at a department store. A beast. Heavy duty, built for surveying in high winds, and Tess had strapped a custom floodlight under its belly. A sun we could summon at midnight. Flight path? I asked. Programmed, she said without looking up. It'll hover, right above the gate on loop. The ridge had become a chessboard, and Tess was already thinking 10 moves ahead. I leaned on the table, staring at the glowing map she had pulled onto the main screen. The old green survey lines, the ones my grandfather had etched into county records with his own hands, overlaying them in red, the fraudulent borders filed that morning by Karen Sunshire. The red slashed through the green like an open wound, carving away my driveway and the heart of my land. There, Tess said, pointing at the overlap. That's the battleground. That's where they'll try to make it real. My phone buzzed. Paige again. Her message came short and sharp. Karen isn't just HOA. 6 months ago, she was land acquisition for a mining company. She bought her place here for cash. Sable Ridge Minerals is a front. The ore under your ridge is the real prize. I turned the phone to Tess. Her eyes hardened. So this isn't about building houses. No, I said. She's building a mine. It was all clicking now. My grandfather had whispered it when I was a boy. The ridge was iron-rich, the backbone of the mountain. That's why he'd fought so hard to secure it. That's why Karen wanted my land. Without my cabin at the highest point, she couldn't touch the vein. We didn't need to say more. The truth had shifted everything. This wasn't about aesthetics. It wasn't even about an HOA. It was about greed that ran deep into the bones of the earth. So we built our plan. 3 layers of defense. First, the legal. Tess had the live stream queued, ready to flip on with a single click. Title card, illegal eviction attempt in progress. A link to county property records right there, proof for the world. If they tried to fake legitimacy, we'd drown them in exposure. Second, the physical. The gate itself. Forged iron, old and heavy, but vulnerable to a truck. I wrapped it with a logging chain the size of my arm, padlock dangling loose. An illusion of weakness. Through the shackle, I threaded a quick pull cable all the way back to the workshop. From inside, I could snap it tight in one motion, clamp and cinch. And third, the psychological. Lights and sound. The drone overhead. The spotlight burning like the sun. The outdoor speaker wired to my microphone. If they came, they wouldn't. Just face us. They'd face the voice of the ridge itself. By nightfall, the plan was sealed, but preparation only makes waiting harder. We ate sandwiches in the basement, eyes flicking between monitors. Every shadow outside the porch light twisted into a figure. Every gust of wind sounded like boots. "What if they have a warrant?" Tess asked finally, her voice low, steady, but edged with worry. "They won't," I said, and I believed it. Paige is watching the courthouse filings. If a judge signs anything, we'll know. So far, it's just smoke. They're bluffing with paper. They think fear is enough. The hours dragged. Midnight came and went. I started to think maybe they'd stalled. Maybe the storm of lawyers pulled them back. But then the driveway camera lit up with headlights. 2 black trucks, same as before, crawling slow up the road. Their beams cut through the trees like knives. Then they killed their lights, idling under moonlight. Behind them, a sedan. The Realtor again, blue blazer, clipboard clutched against the rain. "Showtime," Tess whispered. The truck doors swung open. 4 figures stepped into the night. 2 suits, 2 guards. They huddled, then moved as one up the drive. They walked like men who already believed nothing could stop them. At the gate, one shoved it. It creaked open an inch before the chain held. The padlock dangled, weak, inviting. One of the guards pulled bolt cutters from his pack. He was grinning, but before steel met steel, one of the suits raised his hand. He pointed down at the pink flags fluttering in the mud, and then he stepped forward. Right into the tripwire. In the workshop, the alarm chirped. Quiet, sharp, the sound of prey crossing into the hunter's circle. "That's the signal," I said, my hand gripping the red switch on the wall. Tess's finger hovered over her. "Mouse," I slammed the switch. The maglock snapped tight. I yanked the quick pull cable. The padlock bit home, the chain cinched like a snake. The gate was sealed. At that same instant, Tess clicked the mouse. The drone launched, rising like a phantom, and its spotlight exploded. A sun in the storm, burning white, blinding them where they stood. They froze, caught like thieves in theater lights. And Tess pushed the last command. The live stream went hot. My voice, booming through the outdoor speaker, cut across the rain. "You are trespassing on private property. Your actions are being recorded and broadcast live." For a long, breathless moment, no one moved. They were trapped, blinded, exposed, and the whole world was watching. They stood there in the glare like startled animals, their arrogance stripped away in an instant. The drone's spotlight burned through the sheets of rain, painting their faces pale, their eyes squinting against the flood of white. For the first time, they weren't in control. For the first time, they realized someone had been preparing for them. The taller suit broke first. He dropped his hand from his face and shouted into the storm. "What is this? Turn that light off!" His voice carried not with power but with desperation. His partner fumbled with a phone, his thumb stabbing at the screen, his face illuminated by its glow. But up here on the ridge, cell service was a joke. And under this storm, it was a deadline. He cursed, looking lost. In the basement, Tess's fingers raced across the keyboard. "Viewership climbing," she said flatly. Paige just pushed the link out. Forums, social channels, people are asking questions. "What's going on? Is this real?" It's real, I said into the mic, my voice echoing outside like thunder. It's more real than any paper they filed this morning. The bigger of. The two guards stepped forward, calm and slow, his shadow stretching long under the drone's light. He looked straight at the porch camera as if speaking to me directly. You're making a mistake, he growled. We have the right to be here. You're the one breaking the law. I leaned closer to the mic. The only mistake, I said, my voice like cold stone, was stepping onto my land. The words hung in the storm, heavier than the thunder that rolled through seconds later, and then nature itself seemed to join the battle. The wind picked up, rattling the pines into a mournful sway. Dark clouds churned above the ridge, bruised purple and black, carrying with them the smell of rain and electricity. Tess's screen flashed with a radar map. Severe thunderstorm warning, she whispered. Big one, it's coming fast. The timing was uncanny. The men at the gate heard it too. The low rumble growing louder, the trees bending under the gusts. They glanced up at the sky, then at each other. For the first time since stepping out of those shiny trucks, they looked unsure. Then the storm broke. Fat drops of rain splattered against the cabin roof, darkening the mud under their boots. Within seconds, it was a downpour, washing the drone's lens, blurring the world into streaks of water and light. Lightning cracked across the sky, white, blue, and blinding, followed by thunder so violent it felt like the mountain itself was splitting in half. And then, silence. The monitors went black. The hum of the fridge upstairs stopped. Every light in the cabin died in a single gasp. The power was gone. I said the words even as the truth cut through me. Fail safe. Maglocks down. Only the chains holding now. Tess snapped on a lantern, its glow feeble against the sudden dark. UPS is running the recorder, she said quickly. But the network's out. Internet's dead. The stream is gone. We were cut off. The drone still burned its spotlight above the men, but without control, it was a candle in the storm. The battery was draining fast. In 20 minutes, it would return to its pad. Until then, it circled helplessly, a lone sun drifting over the mud. Outside, the suits regrouped. The bigger guards stepped to the gate, metal cutters in hand, and the sound cut through the storm like a gunshot. Clink, clink, snap. The iron chain screamed and gave way. They're through, Tess said, voice taut, eyes fixed on the grainy battery-fed monitor. The gate swung wide, creaking like a wound tearing open. And then they crossed, past the pink flags, past the false borders, onto the soil my grandfather marked with his own hands. That was the line. They were no longer trespassers. They were invaders. My hand hovered over the toggle switch on the wall. Grandpa had installed it decades ago, long before this fight. He'd called it his bear deterrent. Tonight it wasn't for bears. I flipped it. The night exploded. 2 industrial sirens screamed from opposite corners of the cabin, a pitch so violent it drilled through skulls. At the same time, 4 strobe lights erupted, flashing in chaotic bursts that turned rain into a curtain of knives. Shadows danced wild across the yard. The men staggered back, clutching their ears, shielding their eyes. They had expected a quiet cabin. Instead, they were standing inside a war zone. For a heartbeat, it worked. Panic rippled through them. But these weren't amateurs. The bigger guard steadied, pulled his pistol, and fired twice. The sharp cracks tore through the storm. One siren gurgled, silenced. His partner smashed a strobe with the butt of his weapon. The yard grew darker again, though the flashes still carved through the rain. They're adapting, Tess muttered, her eyes sharp. The guards shoved the gate open wider, pulling the suits through with them. The Realtor, drenched and trembling, filmed from the safety of her sedan but didn't cross the line. She didn't need to. The 4 men already owned the yard in their minds. And then came a new sound. The roar of an engine. One of the guards had slipped back to their truck. The black Ford F-350's headlights flared against the storm as it reversed, tires churning mud. A heavy tow chain clanged onto the iron gate, hooking fast. They're not just opening it, I realized. My chest tightened. They're ripping it out. The truck's engine screamed, wheels spitting mud, straining against the old posts that had stood for half a century. The gate groaned, metal bending, hinges shrieking. The wooden post cracked, splinters flying. They were winning. Piece by piece, they were tearing down my grandfather's legacy. In the basement, Tess's last monitor flickered red. Batteries dying. We're blind in minutes. The gate wailed under the truck's pull, each groan like a death knell. Their voices carried over the storm, triumphant, laughing. They thought they had beaten me, and maybe, for a moment, they had, until I reached for the tarp. Hidden beneath it was a beast of another era. My grandfather's answer to storms and outages. A diesel generator the size of a car, military surplus, bought after the ice storm of '93. Bolted beside it, chained, into the concrete slab, a logging winch built to drag redwoods up mountains. I primed it. Hit the starter. It coughed, growled, then roared alive, shaking the floor beneath my boots. Power surged back through the house. Lights flickered, screens revived, and outside the floodlights blazed. The yard lit up like midday. The chain gleamed. The not-for-sale sign shone white-hot against the rain. The truck roared, tires shrieking. The gate screamed, ready to surrender. But then the winch cable snapped taut, anchored deep in the earth, vibrating with power. And suddenly, the gate didn't move. The Ford strained, its engine howling, but it was locked in a duel with something. Older, steadier, stronger. My grandfather's machine versus their horsepower. And slowly, inevitably, the truck began to lose. The engine faltered. The wheels spun uselessly. The gate stood firm, locked in my grasp. The driver let off the gas, his victory slipping into silence. The men stood in the mud, defeated, staring at the cable that had appeared out of nowhere. They had thrown everything at me. And failed. And that's when she arrived. Through the sheets of rain, a figure emerged from the second truck. A black umbrella tilted against the storm, heels sinking into mud. Her face pale, her eyes sharp, her mouth a hard, cruel line. Karen HOA, the white president of the HOA. The woman who thought she owned the ridge. She had come herself to finish what she started. She walked into the glare like she owned it. The umbrella fought the storm, twisting in the wind, but her stride never broke. Her heels sank in the mud, her floral blouse plastered to her raincoat, but her eyes never wavered from the cabin. Karen HOA, HOA president, mining consultant. The woman who thought she could bend an entire ridge to her will with paperwork and intimidation. Her men gathered around her, the two soaked investors, pale and shaken, and the two guards, guns close at hand, shadows twitching in the strobe. Light. They looked worn down, rattled by alarms and chains and defeat. But Karen? She looked energized. Like a general who had finally arrived at her battlefield. She stopped just shy of the porch camera, letting the floodlight cast her face in stark white. Calm, cold, mean. And when she spoke, her voice carried the same venom as the letters she had mailed me. "Unlock it," she said, flicking her hand at the chain. Same tone she'd used weeks ago, rattling my gate with her Realtor. Back then, I'd stayed silent. But tonight, she wanted an audience. I leaned into the mic, my voice, booming through the outdoor speaker. "Get off my property, Karen." Her lips curled, a smirk sharp as a knife. She raised her phone, rain streaking across the screen. "This isn't your property anymore," she said. "Surveys filed, easement executed. It belongs to Sable. Ridge now." Her words carried like scripture, but I heard the cracks in them, the desperation hiding behind the condescension. "Filed, yes," I answered, letting each word cut through the rain. "Accepted, no. Recorder put a hold on it the minute it hit the system." For the first time, her smirk faltered. Her guards stepped closer, flanking her, their hands brushing their holsters. The taller one unsnapped his strap. A silent warning. Tess's whisper came sharp in my ear. "Hidden cam in the birdhouse shows his hand. He's ready to draw." I let my voice fall calm, almost soft, knowing it would echo stronger outside. "Every word you speak is being recorded, Karen." Every move your men make is evidence. Keep going. She ignored it, took a step closer. Her voice dropped, conspiratorial, as if she thought she could win me with persuasion. Listen, Cole, you're standing in the way of progress. You can walk away right now. We'll even write you a check. $5,000 for your trouble. I almost laughed. $5,000 for land worth millions, for a ridge holding ore veins that could bankroll a mining empire. My property is not for sale, I said, my voice flat, unshaken. Her smile collapsed. The mask of civility peeled away, and what stood there in the floodlights was something rawer, hungrier. You have nothing, Mr. Mercer, she snapped. You're one man in a wooden shack against a multi-million-dollar project. The law is on our side. Money is on our side. You cannot win. She pointed a manicured finger straight at the porch camera, her voice dropping to a threat sharp enough to cut the storm itself. We tried being reasonable. Now we'll be done being reasonable. We'll drag you out of that cabin if we have to. And when we do, the sheriff will arrest you for obstruction. No one will help you. No one will even know until it's over. Behind her, one of the guards let his hand rest heavy on his pistol. Not subtle, not cautious. A promise. And Karen smiled again. Not the smirk from before, but something worse. A predator's grin. She thought she had me cornered. She thought she had the law, the guns, the money, but she didn't realize she was the one standing in the trap. I let silence hang, letting her believe her threat had weight. Then my voice came back, not angry, not afraid, calm, deadly calm. You love paperwork, Karen, I said. So let's look at some. Her head tilted, suspicion flickering. Meet me at the hood of your truck. I've got a document for you. That threw her. She had expected rage, maybe defiance. She had not expected paperwork. Not in the middle of a storm, not when she thought she had stripped me bare. Her arrogance wouldn't let her back down. She flicked her head at her men, and together they moved toward the F-350, chain still hooked to my gate, winch cable still biting deep into the earth. They huddled beneath her umbrella like soldiers under command. I opened the cabin door and stepped out. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle, the wind sharp on my skin. I wasn't wearing a coat. I wanted her to see I wasn't hiding. Wanted her to see that all I carried was a battered green ammo can. It clanged heavy as I set it on the hood of her truck. The sound made her guards twitch, their hands itching for their weapons. But I didn't reach for a gun. Instead, I flipped the latch and pulled out a long, clear plastic tube. Inside, a roll of yellowed vellum. Her eyes narrowed. My grandfather wasn't just a logger, I said, my voice carrying steady over the storm. For 30 years, he was chief surveyor of this county. He didn't just live on this land, he mapped it. I unrolled the document across the wet hood. India ink, hand-drawn, elegant letters from another era. The Elk Ridge Survey, 1960, the master plat, the original. The investors leaned closer, eyes wide. Businessmen or not, they knew what they were looking at. They knew the difference between leverage and a felony. I held up one of her neon pink survey flags, mud clinging to its tip, and laid it on the vellum. Here's your line, I said, tapping the false mark she had planted 50 feet inside my land. And here's the real one. Every rock, every oak, every boulder, marked by the man who measured this ridge before you even knew it existed. Your survey is fraud, and you just tried to enforce it with guns. The color drained from her face. The control in her posture wavered, just a flicker, but I saw it. And the best part? I leaned in. My sister Paige scanned your fake survey the second it hit the county system. She's been on the phone with the sheriff for the last hour. Every lie you filed, every signature you forged, every name you tied to this mining front. Karen's grip on her umbrella tightened. Her jaw clenched, her eyes flashing between fury and panic. And then a sound broke the storm. Low, grinding, mechanical. Headlights appeared down the mountain road, weaving up the switchbacks. One pair, then two, then more. Engines. Heavy vehicles. Official business. Everyone turned. Karen, her guards. The suits, pale as paper now. The law was coming, and it wasn't coming for me. The headlights crawled higher, bending with the switchbacks, beams cutting through sheets of rain. The sound of engines echoed against the ridge, steady, official, inevitable. For the first time, Karen's mask slipped. Her eyes darted from the eye. Glowing map on the hood of her truck to the lights below, as if weighing whether her empire was collapsing in real time. "What is that?" One of the suits stammered, his voice barely audible over the rain. His expensive shoes were caked in mud, his hair plastered to his forehead. He didn't look like an investor anymore. He looked like a cornered animal. "That," I said, my voice cutting through the storm, "is the law you were so eager to quote, Karen." But before the lights reached us, another sound ripped through the night. A groaning crack, deep and primal, like the ridge itself splitting in half. Then a thunderous crash that shook the ground under our boots. The headlights on the mountain froze, beams jittering against trees. The convoy had stopped. The storm had finished a job I'd been watching for years. A giant white pine, dead, leaning for a decade, had finally surrendered to the wind and rain. It toppled down across the only road up, 1,000 pounds of timber sealing the path like a gate from nature itself. Karen whipped her head back to me, confusion and terror flashing in her eyes. "What was that?" I held her gaze, calm as stone. "That was your way out." Her lips parted as the truth sank in. She saw it. She saw what I'd seen hours earlier when I walked the ridge with my chainsaw. The cuts I'd carved into the pine's trunk, subtle, hidden, enough to weaken it. Enough to make sure when the storm came, the ridge itself would fight with me. I didn't say a word. I let her think it. The rain hissed on the vellum mat between us. The investors shifted uncomfortably, their confidence bleeding away with every second. One muttered, "We shouldn't be here. We shouldn't," but stopped when Karen's glare sliced through him. The taller guard made the mistake of letting instinct take over. His hand dropped to his pistol, frustration flashing like lightning in his eyes. "Don't!" My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was granite, immovable. It froze him mid-motion. "The sheriff's men are climbing this hill right now," I said. "Pull that weapon, and you'll give them reason to bury you under charges you won't crawl out of." The suits were trembling now. The smaller one raised his hands, palms open, as if I were the one holding a gun. He started backing toward the headlights below, toward the safety of real law, and then the voices came. "Sheriff's Department. Announce yourselves." Flashlight beams cut through the trees, bouncing off rain and smoke, climbing the hill on foot. They were closer now, their voices growing clearer with each call. Karen stood stiff, umbrella trembling in her hand, her men gathering tight around her like a crumbling shield wall. The power in her voice had evaporated. The iron mask of command was cracking, revealing what was underneath. Panic. The first deputy crested the hill, his beam slicing across the yard. Broad-shouldered, calm, steady. Deputy Miller. A man who had drunk coffee with my grandfather in the diner downtown, back when respect was earned by calloused hands and honest work. His light swept across the chaos. The truck chained to my gate. The winch cable biting into steel, the soaked suits shivering in the mud, Karen standing frozen under her collapsing umbrella, and me, standing by the hood of her truck with my grandfather's map spread like scripture. "Up here, Miller," I called, my voice carrying strong through the storm. "Everyone's safe." The guard's hand still hovered near his weapon. I looked straight at him, my voice low but sharp. "And everyone's going to stay that way." The message landed. His hand lifted, slow, reluctant. The pistol stayed in its holster. The investors broke first. They stumbled toward Miller, their words tumbling over each other in frantic desperation. "We were misled, officer. She said the property was secured. We thought this was legal. We had no idea." The deputies barely acknowledged them, their focus locked on Karen. The smarter of the two guards read the room. He raised his hands, stepping back, his voice dripping with fake innocence. "We were hired for site security. She told us the owner was a squatter. Said we had papers. We were just following orders." Karen didn't flinch, didn't move. But her silence was the loudest sound on the ridge. Miller walked straight to the truck's hood, his flashlight beam resting on the vellum map, then on the muddy pink flag I'd laid over it. His eyes met mine, steady. "Evening, Cole. 2. "Rounds fired at my siren," I said, my voice flat. "Casings at the gate, all on camera." He nodded once, then motioned to his partner. "Bag them!" I stepped back as the deputies moved in, their beams blinding in the rain. Karen didn't resist when Miller pulled the cuffs from his belt. The sound of metal ratcheting shut around. Her wrists was louder than thunder. "Karen Sunshire," Miller said, his voice cold, formal, final. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false documents, trespassing, and attempted illegal eviction." The umbrella slipped from her hand and fell into the mud. She stood there, drenched, trembling, her power gone. Her men had abandoned her. Her investors had flipped. Her guards were surrendering, and the ridge itself had sealed her fate. As Miller led her down the muddy path, I caught one last look at her face. The icy arrogance was gone. All that remained was a woman who had believed greed could buy her the mountain, and lost. The law was here. Justice was in motion, and for the first time in months, the ridge was quiet. But in the quiet, I knew something deeper. This battle was won. But the war for my grandfather's legacy, had only just begun. The click of steel cuffs echoed in the storm, louder than thunder, louder than Karen's protests that never came. She didn't speak as Deputy Miller led her past the chained gate, head bowed, rain streaking her face. The predator's smile was gone. All that remained was a woman stripped bare of power, reduced to nothing more than a prisoner sinking ankle-deep in mud. Her guards followed, their hands raised in surrender, their bravado washed away by floodlights and law. The investors hurried after them, tripping over themselves to swear innocence, to distance themselves from her. But the ridge wasn't listening. It was done with excuses. I stood by the gate, Tessa's blanket wrapped around her shoulders as she stepped onto the porch, lantern light glowing behind her. She looked exhausted, hair wet, face pale, but her eyes, those eyes burned steady with the fire I'd always known was there. She hadn't wavered, not once. For a long moment, the yard was nothing but the sound of rain dripping from the eaves, the storm's rage softening into a steady drizzle. The floodlights still burned, illuminating the wreckage. My lawn was a battlefield, ripped into mud by tires and boots, my iron gate bent and broken, my grandfather's posts leaning like wounded soldiers. But the ridge was ours. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Tess joined me at the gate, her hand slipping into mine, cold and trembling. "It's over," she whispered. "Not yet," I said, my eyes following the deputies. Flashlights as they disappeared down the trail, Karen stumbling between them. But soon, the generator roared steady, drowning the night in its heartbeat. The winch cable, slick with rain, still held tight, a steel line that had refused to surrender when everything else nearly did. I reached over, disengaged the clutch, and felt the tension release with a sigh. The gate sagged, groaning, its duty done. Tess rested her head against my shoulder. For a moment, the weight of it all pressed down on me. Weeks of letters, the endless threats, the pink flags planted like scars across the land, the black trucks idling on the county road, the storm and the standoff. The fight had tested everything. We were still standing. I thought of my grandfather, his voice echoing in memory. "They don't make more of land, Cole. Don't ever let them take it." Tonight his words had lived again. We stayed out there until the last deputy's light vanished down the ridge. Then finally we went inside. The basement command center glowed faintly on generator power. Screens showed the frozen images of the night. Karen under the floodlights, her guards blinded by strobes, the truck chained and stalled. Tess shut down the feeds one by one, her fingers slow now, drained of energy. I poured us coffee, black and bitter, and we sat together in silence. Minutes passed. Hours. The storm rolled east, leaving only dripping trees and the smell of wet pine. When dawn came, it didn't creep. It broke fast, sunlight burning away clouds, the ridge shining clean as if nothing had ever touched it. But the scars remained. Mud. Broken iron. the memory of headlights and threats. I walked the yard at sunrise, boots sinking deep. The not for. Sale sign still gleamed on the gate, dented but defiant. I left it there, a reminder, a warning. My phone buzzed. Paige. Her voice was electric when I answered, cutting through the morning stillness. It's over, Cole. For real this time. I hit speaker so Tess could hear. Tell us. Karen cracked, Paige said, almost laughing. Sitting in a holding cell, facing felony charges with no one left to shield her, she started talking. The investors turned too. They dumped every email, every contract, every dollar trail they had. Sable Ridge Minerals wasn't just shady. It was a full-blown criminal enterprise. The DA's already moving. Emergency injunction signed before the courthouse even opened. The survey and easements, null and void. Legally, it's like they never existed. Tess let out a breath that was almost a sob. Paige wasn't finished. The money trail's a highway. Offshore accounts, shell companies, fraud stacked on fraud. They're seizing everything. She's not just headed to prison, Cole, she's going broke. For a second, I couldn't answer. My throat closed. Relief was supposed to feel light, but instead it felt heavy, like I'd been carrying the ridge on my back and had finally set it down. Neighbors started calling before Paige even hung up. Eli, the same man who'd complained about my lights last week, called to apologize. Said Karen had sold everyone a dream of a park and trails, painted me as the angry recluse blocking progress. Now they knew the truth. Now they knew she'd been selling them a mine dressed as paradise. Offers poured in, chainsaws to clear the fallen pine from the road, strong backs to reset the posts. Tools, lumber, hands willing to help rebuild. For the first time in months, the ridge didn't feel like a siege. It felt like a community. I stood on the porch with Tess, coffee steaming in my hand, the morning sun washing over the hills my grandfather had mapped with his own 2 hands. The fight had scarred the land, but it hadn't broken it. The ridge was still ours. But more than that, it was safe. Safe from greed. Safe from lies. Safe because we had fought, because we hadn't bowed, because sometimes the only way to keep something alive is to guard it, like it's the last breath in your chest. Tess slid her arm through mine, her voice soft but steady. You did it. I shook my head. No, we did it. You, me, Paige, even the ridge itself. We all stood. And for the first time in a long time, I believed it. The battle was over, but the lesson would last forever. The sun rose over Elk Ridge like it was reclaiming the world. Golden light spilled across the dripping pines, turning the storm's ruin into something sacred. The air smelled clean, sharp with wet earth and pine resin. It was the kind of morning my grandfather used to say wash the slate of life clean, but this morning carried scars that sunlight couldn't erase. The yard was a battlefield. Mud churned into deep ruts by spinning tires. The gate twisted, one hinge broken, its iron body leaning like a wounded soldier. Strobe lights shattered, siren wires dangling from the eaves like torn sinew. Every mark told the story of the night. And yet, the land still stood. The ridge still breathed. By mid-morning, the first neighbors arrived. I heard the buzz of chainsaws before I saw them. Pickup trucks rolling slow up the road, men and women climbing out with gloves, helmets, coffee thermoses steaming in the cool air. These were the same people who had believed Karen's story, who had nodded along when she painted me as the recluse, the obstacle to progress. And yet, here they were, boots sinking in mud, eyes meeting mine with a mix of apology and determination. Eli was first, the man who had called the sheriff on me 2 weeks ago for my illegal floodlights. He walked up, hat in hand, his face weathered but humble. "Cole," he said, voice rough. "I was wrong." He looked past me, at the broken gate, the scarred yard, then back at me. We all were. Thought she was building something for us. Didn't see she was just taking it from all of us? I studied him for a moment. Then I nodded. "Grab a saw. That pine isn't moving itself." Relief softened his face, and he hurried back to his truck. For hours, the ridge hummed with the sound of chains biting wood, Axes striking, men and women hauling branches out of the road. The fallen white pine, once an obstacle, now became a rallying point. They worked as though every cut, every drag of a limb was an apology, a way to take back the silence they'd given Karen. By noon, the road was clear. The stumps rolled to the side, sawdust coating the mud like snow. Neighbors lingered, sweaty and tired but smiling, handing Tess jars of preserves, offering lumber to mend the gate, wiring to fix the strobes. For the first time in months, the ridge didn't feel like mine alone. It felt like ours. Inside, Tess kept the coffee flowing, her laugh lightening the room as people crowded the porch. She had been the quiet force, the one who wired the cameras, who built the system that made the truth undeniable. Now, neighbors looked at her with new eyes, not as the recluse's wife, but as the woman who had stood her ground with steel in her veins. Paige called again, her voice buzzing with energy. It's unraveling faster than anyone thought. The DA's office is swamped with evidence. Karen's investors are fighting each other to cut deals. Every account, every shell company is coming apart. She's not walking away from this one. Tess put the phone on speaker, and the neighbors gathered close to listen. Paige's words carried like gospel. By the end of her call, they weren't just my allies. They were witnesses. They were believers. I walked them to the road as dusk settled, the ridge glowing gold under the setting sun. One by one, they gripped my hand, some with words, some with silence. Apologies weren't necessary. They'd shown where they stood now, and actions always weigh more than words. When the last truck pulled away, the ridge fell quiet again. Tess, and I stood by the broken gate, the not for sale sign still bolted firm, streaked with mud but shining under the fading light. She leaned against me, her voice soft. Do you think they'll try again? I looked out over the hills, the dark line of forest stretching toward the horizon. Maybe not her, but someone will. They always do. Silence wrapped around us for a moment. Then I added, but now, they know this ridge won't break easy. They know we'll fight. Tess nodded, her hand slipping into mine. We already proved it once. The truth was, I hadn't wanted this fight. I had wanted quiet, solitude, mornings filled with coffee and the sound of wind through the trees. But sometimes life doesn't give you the choice. Sometimes it drags the fight to your front porch, and the only way forward is through it. As night fell, I thought of my grandfather again, of his weathered hands pressing a survey pin into the earth, his voice steady in my memory. Land is legacy, Cole. You guard it, or you lose more than soil. You lose your place in the world. He'd been right. This wasn't just about acreage or iron veins or easements. It was about dignity, about standing when the world tells you to kneel, about refusing to let greed rewrite history. And in that moment, under the stars returning after the storm, I felt it clear as the ridgeline against the horizon. The land wasn't just safe. It was sacred. Tess broke the silence, her voice carrying a tired smile. You know, she said, that sign might be the truest thing we own. Private property. Not for sale. A line in steel, a line in blood, and now a line no one on this ridge would ever cross again. Dawn broke different the next day. Not with storm clouds or the weight of headlights crawling up the ridge, but with a clarity that seemed to cut the air itself. The world smelled of wet pine and fresh earth, a ridge washed clean. The chaos of the night before felt almost like a dream, except the scars remained, deep ruts in the mud, splintered posts where my gate once stood, siren wires dangling from the eaves like veins exposed. I stood on the porch with a steaming mug of coffee, warming my hands. Tess stepped out beside me, wrapped in a blanket, her hair tangled, her face lined with exhaustion. She rested her head against my shoulder, and for the first time in months, there was no edge in her breathing. Just peace. The phone rang. Paige, it's done, she said, her voice fierce with triumph. Karen folded. She's talking nonstop, giving the DA everything. The shell companies, the investors, the offshore accounts, It's all unraveling. They've already seized her assets. An emergency injunction wiped the false survey like it never existed. Legally, the cloud on your title is gone. Tess exhaled, tears slipping down her cheeks. I closed my eyes. The weight that had sat on my chest for months finally lifted. Paige wasn't finished. Neighbors are rallying too. The whole county knows now. People are calling her what she really was, a fraud. They know you were the one who stood up. They're coming to help rebuild. And she was right. Before noon, trucks rolled up the ridge. Not black SUVs filled with suits and muscle, but dented pickups, bedliners full of lumber, posts, tools, and willing hands. Neighbors who had once doubted, once whispered that I was the problem, now stood shoulder to shoulder with me. The broken gate was hauled upright. New posts were sunk, set in concrete deeper than before. Welders brought torches, fusing steel until sparks lit the air. The ridge hummed with the sound of work, honest work, not greed disguised as development. One by one, the pieces of my land came back to life. And one by one, the people who had been silent under Karen's spell offered words that carried more weight than any apology. I'm sorry. We should have seen it sooner. You weren't just fighting for yourself, you were fighting for all of us. By sundown, the gate stood firm again, stronger than before. The not for sale sign bolted back into place, letters gleaming in the last light of day. That night, Tess and I sat on the porch as the sun slipped behind the hills, painting the sky with fire. The ridge stretched out before us, whole, unbroken. And I thought of my grandfather, of the way his boots had pressed these same paths, of the way his voice carried the kind of truth that outlives the man himself. They don't make more of land, Cole. Don't let them take it. I whispered it under my breath, a vow renewed, because this fight hadn't just been about a driveway, or survey flags, or some HOA president with a miner's greed. It had been about something deeper: dignity, legacy. The quiet strength of knowing where you come from and refusing to sell it for any price. The ridge had stood because we had stood. Not with bullets, not with fists, but with truth. With patience sharpened into steel. With courage that didn't roar, but whispered, not here, not this land, not ever. The storm had tried to break us. Karen had tried to own us. The world had tried to forget us. But in the end, the ridge itself had spoken louder than all of them, and now, in the hush of twilight, the silence finally returned. The kind of silence my grandfather had built this cabin for. The kind that isn't empty, but full. Full of promise. Full of memory. Full of life yet to come. Tess tightened her arm around mine. We did it, she whispered. I looked out across the hills, the forest stretching into shadow, the lake glimmering in the distance, and I knew the truth. No, I said softly, my voice steady. Sure. The ridge did it. We just stood long enough to let it fight with us. Because in the end, the land was never just soil. It was history. It was blood. It was promise. And some things in this world are worth every storm, every scar, every battle it takes to defend them. The ridge was safe. The fight was won, and the quiet had returned.